All right, so in this session at GroupBy, Rob Sewell, aka the DBA with the beard, is going to be talking about turning your SQL Server admin checklist into Pester Tests. So take it away, Rob.
Hello, nice to meet you all. My name's Rob, and as you can see, you can find me on Twitter on SQL DBA with beard, but my website is sqldbawithabeard.com, and there's a very good reason for that. And the reason is that when I first changed my Twitter handle, Twitter's only got a 15-character limit. So I became SQL DBA with a bear. I nearly kept it, and I thought, no. So SQL DBA with beard on Twitter. If you would like to find all of the slides and code that I use, it's on my GitHub, github.com, SQL DBA with the beard presentations, and we have a group by green is good, red is bad. Or in fact, green is good, red, and nothing else. So let's find some slides and a clicker. I'm a guy that likes to run around and move around, so you're not getting the full picture here, just looking at me through your little screen. But everybody has got lists. My list for today: get up, drink appropriate liquid. That did used to say drink coffee until I was doing this presentation in Germany, and a couple of people went, but I don't drink coffee. So we changed it to appropriate liquid. And then the rest of the stuff that we need to do. So the point of this presentation is not to show you things that you should use. You should not take this code and put it onto your environment and make use of it. The idea is to give you some examples, to give you some ideas, to make you think, to go with what is it you need for yourself and for your own environments. When you think about checklists, we all have checklists for a new server, for doing a migration, for incidents, software releases, all of these sort of things. If we're in an ITIL type environment, we're going to have checklists for our change process, our change management process. And all of those are going to be very much set in stone by our environment, by our companies, by the processes and procedures that we need to follow as IT professionals. But this is more about the other sort of checklists that we've got. So I'd like you to go and ask your presenters when they're doing their presentations, did you write a Pester test? Did you make sure that everything was in place for your environment before you did your presentation? I'll show you in a while, I have Pester tests that I've run before I've done this presentation, which hopefully means that everything is going to work as planned. Let's pray to the demo gods, but hopefully not as much. But if we're doing demos for other companies, if we're doing presentations at work or for clients, or our morning checks, or for incident response, or maybe the times we say to first line support, before you call me out at 3 o'clock in the morning, I want you to check all of these things, because at 3 o'clock in the morning, if you haven't checked all those things, I'm going to be not very happy. I'm hopeful that all of you have got ideas in your head that you're thinking about that will give you further things that you can make use of the code that we'll go and have a look at in a while. So Pester. Pester provides a framework for running unit tests to execute and validate PowerShell commands from within PowerShell. It's designed to do TDD for PowerShell code. So to unit test our PowerShell code and make sure that it does what we want so that when we give the code to people, it works as expected. However, it says for validating PowerShell commands. So some clever people went, oh, hang on a minute, we don't just have to use this for using unit code. We can use this to test the results of any PowerShell that we use. Click. What does it look like? This is what it looks like. At the top, we have our describe block. That is our scope for those tests. We have a curly brace on the same line. And the reason we have a curly brace on the same line, and I mention it, is because otherwise you get one of my most favorite PowerShell error messages where it says, have you put the curly brace on the next line? Next, we have a context. The context is enables us to group a set of texts together. And again, it has its own scope, which may be important. And then we have our test. Our test uses the word it. It, name of the test, curly brace on the same line. And then the value, the thing I'm testing, should be a thing. So I like to think of it as what I am should be what is expected. In the bottom half of the screen, you can see the results of running a test. We get some green saying describing, this is our group of tests, our describe block, and then a context with the name. If our test passes, it's green. It also has a little plus sign and how long it took to run. And if it fails, it says this expected the string length to be 16, but it was 9. And then there's a nice little arrow that's going through and pointing up to where the difference is. And at the bottom, we have our total time and a summary of how many tests passed, failed, skipped. We're still waiting on the answer, and we don't really know what the answer was. So as you can see by my slides, I am not somebody who likes to bore you with PowerPoint and bullet lists. However, I must give you my box of shame, because this slide does have a lot of text on it, and I apologize, but I think you can see why. These are our should operators. So our test was what I am, pipe, should, something, and then what is expected. And this is the list of things that you can use. We're called assertions. And I'm not going to describe any of this. You guys can read, and more importantly, because it's PowerShell, you can see that in general, be and be exactly, or be greater than and be less than, you know exactly what they're going to do. The one I'm going to point out to you is contain. If you're used to working with PowerShell, you quite often will use contains for getting items out of an array. It will not work in Pester. Pester uses contain for seeing if a file contains specific text. So the question is, Rob, what can you validate? And the answer can only be given, you'll only get this if you know Top Gear, because it needs to be given in a Jeremy Clarkson voice. And it goes, everything in the world. Of course, it's not really everything in the world, but everything in the world that you can test with PowerShell. So in that example you can see there, that is merely the SMO properties for a SQL server, for the job server, and for the logins. Only on a SQL server. So there's all of those things that we can test straight away. And if you examine a SQL Server SMO object, there are probably thousands of different properties that you can check. And if you take PowerShell to look at any other service, Windows service, Exchange, Linux, wherever you want to go, the numbers are only going to get bigger. So I don't know about you, but I'm fed up of looking at slides. Let's have some demo. So I said I would show you my Pester test. Here is my Pester test that I ran before I did my presentation. And what we're doing is checking things like, are my SQL Server instances up and running? Do I have the right code running? Do I have PowerPoint running? Do I have the right PowerPoint running? I shouldn't have mail open. I shouldn't have Tweetium open. I shouldn't have prompt open. And all of these things, people have said to me before, you're a little bit over the top about this, Rob. Right? Maybe. But a lot of these things are things that I have experienced when I've come to do presentations. I'm doing a presentation about the SQL Server provider, but I've got green is good, red is bad, PowerPoint open. I've got the wrong code open. So as I haven't written all of these in one big hit is the message really. I've iterated through and built these up as we go. So let's get ourselves down the bottom there. And we'll have a look at demo number 1. And demo number 1 says, oh, I forgot one thing. When you're working in Visual Studio Code, this is the insiders version. If you press F1, you get this magical box at the top allowing you to do things. And one of the things we can do is change our color theme. So I think, seeing as we've had a Blackboard presentation theme, I think we'll have a Blackboard theme for our Visual Studio Code, as long as the guys looking on the webcam say that we can read the code there. All good?
Yeah, looks good.
Excellent. So at the top it says run then talk, Rob. So let's run this and then talk. So we're looking at do things exist. So we can do test connection, just a ping. Does this server exist? And I do it quiet because we don't want any output from our PowerShell command. And I put error action silently continue, which says, PowerShell, if something goes wrong, don't tell me, just carry on. Because all I want to have is the results of my Pester test and not a sea of blood from a PowerShell script that's gone a bit screwy. We can check if our instance exists. So this is going to be DBA Tools. We're going to have our module installed, and this is going to test our SQL connection. Are we getting a good connection? And we're saying our connect success should be equal to true. We can check our SQL error log. So our SQL error log should contain, because remember, contain is for finding things inside files. SQL Server is now ready for client connections. A fairly good-ish way of saying that SQL is about ready to go. We say our error log shows check DB finished without errors. We're using some regex here just to check using a dot and a star. So we're saying that our error log should contain check DB for database and any other characters finished without errors. Normally when I'm in front of a live audience, I'll say, so this means that we have checked that all of our databases have successfully passed their check DB, doesn't it? And hopefully Drew is going to be shaking his head going, no. Because what this actually says is the error log has one instance of check DB for database something finished without errors. The important message is don't only understand what your tests, when your test will pass, but understand what's going to make them fail. So we need to know that if we're going to have, if we want to have a check DB for database check, we're going to have to do a little bit more coding to make that work. This is how we can use our PowerShell knowledge of contains within an array. So our server login's name is an array of names that are on our server, and we're saying it should contain the beard Rob, and then we're just saying that this should be true. The pipe should be true is not actually needed. I could just leave server login's name contains the beard Rob, because Pester will assume that if the result is true, that is a pass, and if the result is anything else, that is a fail. So we can check other features. We can check our Hyper-V is installed. We can check if IIS is installed. We can check on a remote server if we've got SMB1 should be removed. Probably something a lot of people have been checking over the last few weeks with WannaCry. We could check our .NET versions. We could check which version of an operating system we've got. We can look at files. Again, we can just use test path, a normal generic PowerShell command, or we could use test SQL path from DBA Tools, which is checking that our SQL Server database engine account has access to a share. So if the situations where our backup share is protected due to PCI or other security reasons, we still need to check that our database engine can actually access a share. We can check how many files. We can check the versions of our files. We can check the creation dates or how old they are. And we can check our machine. Do we have the right network adapters, the DNS servers, the correct gateway? Or our programs? Should we have these programs or those programs? What versions should they be? These are all things that we can check. Not necessarily you must, but they're things that you can do. And as you can see, the server that doesn't exist returned a false. And the logins do not contain the beard/Rob on that particular instance. That's just to show you what failed tests look like. You'll also notice that I don't have any summary in these results because I just ran the code. What I like to say is Pester is just PowerShell. So we can just highlight the code and run it in PowerShell, in VS Code, in the ISE, any other IDE that you choose to use. Number 2. It's all very well and good having tests that are going to run the same each time. But how about if you're in a situation where you're going to go into different environments and maybe you want slightly different versions? So if you're reading that code, you can see that I can choose to put a list of servers into here. I can choose which SQL admin accounts I'm expecting. I can choose my backup directories. I can choose how often I'm running my Olahalagram backup jobs. I can choose if I have my SB Blitz cache, and the rest of those brilliant tools. This is a slightly older version. And this is how we can do it. We create ourselves a palms hash table, that's the word, with name and value pairs. And then down at the bottom, we say test SQL default and give it these parameters. And our test SQL default file looks like this. As you can see on the right, there is a lot of code in here. But it basically comes down to this. We create ourselves a return object. Let's find where we create ourselves the return object, Rob. We create ourselves a return object for each server. We then log onto the server and run a script block to get all of our results back and place them into the return object like this. We say, in our return object, create a backup directory and make the value equal to the server's backup directory. And once we've done that for all of those things, we can simply come down into our test and you see that basically the return temp files should be the variable temp files, or our Olahalagram system full frequency should be this variable that we've defined here. And we can put our variables into our test name as well. And that enables us to pass in these parameters like this. So if I go into a different environment, I can just change these values here to the ones that are correct for this particular environment and their RPO, RTO, or whatever it is that they've got. And then I can just run my code. But it will work much better if I highlight all of my parameters as well. So now we're going to just test these 3 SQL servers, and we're going to check them for these default, which is what I have in my data center, i.e. my laptop here. And we're just going to make sure that everything is running as we expect it to be. And as you can see, we're going through checking our SB Blitz, checking we've got some certain agent jobs. Have we got services? Are all our default alerts, everything set up as we expected? Green is good, red is bad. I didn't see any red, so I'm happy. Let's have a look at number 3. So for test number 3, we're now going to look at how we can invoke Pester. And I use that word because this is the command that we use, Invoke Pester. And what Invoke Pester will do is run any files that have a name like this one, .tests.ps1 within a folder, it'll just run all of them. If we look in this particular file, we can see that in our describe block, we've got a few things added. So we've got some tags. So for testing our access to our backup share, we've got a tag of server and backup. For testing our collation, we've got a tag of server and collation. For testing our last known good DBCC checkDB, we've got a database and a DBCC because we're checking every database. If we look here, we're creating some test cases. Test cases allow us to loop through objects and run the same test again and again and again with against different things. So we create ourselves our test case test case array of our SQL servers, and then we access it by adding a parameter into our it block, the test cases parameter after the title, and then we could say test SQL path for every SQL server should be this path, and it should be true. However, that doesn't always work. True dyed-in-the-wool Pester people do not accept that this is a way of doing things. This is not how they like to see their unit tests done. But this is not a unit test. This is an environmental validation. Excuse me. And in this scenario, it's easier for me to use a for each loop because I need to for each through my SQL servers, and then I need to for each through my tests. And I couldn't make the test cases work with two loops. But it doesn't matter. You don't have to use test cases. You can just use your for each loops. So if we make sure that we change our prompts, we can then run Invoke Pester Tag Backup. And all that's going to do is run one of the tests that were in this file here. So we've got a number of tests in this file, number of describe blocks, but only one of them has a tag of server, and that's the only one that was run. If we just wanted to do the collation, we're just going to check that all the databases on our instance have a collation that matches the server collation. Or a DBCC checkDB. I don't know well, I do know how to do this in T-SQL. I don't think you can do this in one line of code any quicker than that. We've just checked 84 times whether a database has had a successful checkDB, whether it was run within the last 14 days, and whether it has data purity enabled. And that's, again, I'm going to say DBA Tools again, because if you're using SQL Server, you're using PowerShell, DBA Tools is without doubt the module you need. And it has this wonderful command called get DBA last good checkDB, which enables us to do in one line of code, just like that, have all our databases had a successful checkDB. We could check our server tag. That's going to check the backup and the collation because they were two tags, two tests. Or we could check all of them in one go. So it's another way of enabling you to filter which tests you need to run in which environments. Maybe you would tag them as development, test, and production. If you were having an environment where you needed to test different things for different environments, you could write different tests, put them all in the same test block, in the same test script, and access them just using the tag parameter. Now that took 14.41 seconds to run our 89 tests. But the information, if you can imagine, if we're doing 15,000 Pester tests and we had one failure, it would scroll up. You'd be looking, let's do it that way. You'd be looking up going, where did it go? Where did it go? Come back, come back. So we have a show parameter with Pester. And what show allows us to do is to restrict the amount of information that we display to the screen. So if instead of running, we're running the entire suite of tests again, but with the fails, that's with an S, all we're getting is our describe block It would have our context block if we had any, and any failures. And also you see that test ran only in 7.6 seconds. Or we could have just the summary. And when we run the summary, nothing's happening. Test is just something's going on. Normally runs really much quicker than this. All you get at the end is just the summary, and it runs quicker. Normally, when you're just showing the summary, significantly quicker. However, just because all we have returned to the screen is the summary does not mean that that's all of the information that we can get out of our Invoke Pester. So when we run an Invoke Pester with a show summary and this pass-through parameter, we can assign it to a variable. When we do that, we're still going to see the same information as we saw for the last test. But actually, what we have stored here in our variable is something better. We have our entire test results stored in a variable. So we can see how many tests we ran, how many passed, how many failed, and then we have our test results here. So now we can start to examine our object. If you're new to PowerShell, get-member is one of the commands that you need to know. It enables you to examine an object and see all of the methods, properties, and events that are available to you. So we can see these are all the things we have available. We have a test results. Let's have a look at our first 5 test results. When we look at that, we can see it's the same sort of information as we had displayed on the screen. We have error message, expected false but was true, the parameterized name, and then the actual name of the test as well, and how long each particular test started to look. So we could just return how many tests passed, oops, down there at the bottom, or how many failed, just the one. Or we could format our information a little differently and saying, well, just give me the name of the test and whether it passed or not. And if there was a failure message, give me the failure message as well. I don't want all the rest of the information. That's all that I want. So we're moving on. We're developing what we can do with our Pester. Oh, should we do demo number 4 before we do demo number 5? Probably better. So one of the things we can do, instead of hard coding all of our parameters into our test SQL defaults and doing things in that way, maybe we want to be even more dynamic in the way that we work with our tests. So we can use a JSON file like this. And within the JSON file, in this example, we're saying for the backup share test, this is the backup share we want. I'd like you to search for the Rob XPS server and don't skip. Skip is another way of working with the tests that you have within Pester. So it enables you to just maybe, if you've written the test but you haven't written the code for it yet, maybe if your environment works for, if you need to test this particular thing in your production environment, but it doesn't exist in your development environment. Maybe when you're running it as dev, you might want to be able to skip that test. So this is a way of enabling us to do that. We can get our SQL Server names in a number of different ways. I keep trying to work out a way of writing this JSON to enable it to be usable for everybody. But as we were talking about in the break, sometimes it's difficult to fit everybody's experience because people have different ways of doing things. So I'll say these are a number of different ways you can grab your SQL servers using PowerShell. You can get them from your Hyper-V server. So in my particular environment here at home, I use this Hyper-V parameter from my JSON files. You could use your registered servers via DBA Tools. the get SQL registered server name, and you could just pick out which group of servers we want to use. You could just use the SQL provider with PowerShell and the SQL Server module, which is available on the PowerShell gallery now, and just get them straight from your central management server, either from your remote central management server or from your local registered servers, or both will be available there. But whichever way you find to do it, you could just put them in as an array, grab them out of a text file. There are a number of million of different ways of grabbing your SQL servers. Once we've got our SQL servers into this variable, so run that bit of code, Rob, then we need to grab our configuration. And this is how we get our configuration out of our JSON. We need to add this little join here to turn it into JSON that PowerShell will understand. We run that, we don't get an output, but in our config variable, we have all of the JSON displayed slightly differently, but it's still just the JSON. Now what we can do is, within this DBA Tools Scripts is a repository that I've got on my GitHub, which is just a number of Pester tests that make use of the DBA Tools module and enable you to test different things in different ways. And some of them enable you to test at a server level or at a database level, or even more detailed, maybe at a column level or something for identity. And we can run these tests just using the configuration that we've got in our JSON file. So we're testing our collation, but instead of testing it just for the server like we did previously, now we're just checking that every single database on those 3 instances is correct. One of my favorite ones, the identity column. We're checking every single database on those instances. We're checking every column in those databases, and we're seeing if they are an identity column and are they less than 90% full. Because we don't want to be the guys that end up with an identity column that fills up and everything stops and all the white shirts come and start shouting here, going, oh, have you fixed it? Can you fix it? Can you fix it? Can you fix it? And it just work. Ta-da, keep going. I can't remember what the next tests are, otherwise I'd be telling you what's coming up. But all of this configuration is coming straight out of our JSON. So if I want to change it, I just go and alter that JSON file, maybe create a JSON file for different environments and use that and run them against the same set of scripts. It just goes and picks them up. So our last good DBCC check DB. But instead of checking each database individually, we'll check all of the databases on the instance. So we can filter and compress the amount of information that we're getting. And there's an example of a skip. So I'm testing the temp DB configuration using the DBA Tools command, and I don't want to get a failure for having my temp DB files on my C drive because I only have a C drive. So I can just set to skip within my configuration JSON and run my test, and I will just get a yellow skipped, and here a yellow skipped. So what we can do is take our test results variable, and we can convert that to JSON and stick it into a file. I'm not going to run that because I want to show you the one with the more failures in than this has got. But we're going to use that in a minute. But it's just a way of saying the tests variable we've got is just held in memory within our PowerShell. But if you want to convert it into JSON, XML, HTML, whatever you want, you can do that and then save it into a file. So doing well for demo number 5. This is where I first saw the beauty of Pester in a real valued way. Because what I had to do was I had to set up Olahalagran's maintenance solution in an estate, and I had to prove to get paid that all of these things were correct. So for Olahalagran, I need to check, I really should check that the SQL agent is running on each of these instances, otherwise none of my job's going to run. I need to check that it's set to auto start, because then when the box is bounced or for whatever reason, it's going to come back up. I need to make sure I've got the following jobs: the command cleanup, all of the database backups, the full, the diff, the logs, the integrity checks, the index optimizer, the delete backup history, the system policy purge history. Every single one of those jobs should exist. Should have run successfully, because I must have tested it before I handed it the estate over, and it must be scheduled so that we know it's going to run regularly. Then I need to check the files, because it's all very good saying I've got these backup jobs and they're all running, but I want to make sure that these files actually exist. So there needs to be a backup share for every folder on the server. And there needs to be a folder for every database inside that, except where we've got availability groups, because they have their own folder which need to have a share in them. They need to have a database folder in them. Inside each of those database folders, we need to have a full, a diff, and a log folder, except for system databases and databases that are in simple recovery and the ones that are log shipped, because they only need a full and diff folder. And then every full folder should have files in it, and the newest file should be less than 7 days old, because that was the RPO that I'm making up here. And every diff folder should have files in it, and the newest one should be less than 24 hours old. And every log folder should have files in it, and they should be less than 30 minutes old. So what I could have done is I could have said to my junior DBA, Drew, could you go through and check these things off and write them down on a piece of paper, please? Tick, 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 tick. You could have done. Yeah, tick, 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 tick. On 100 instances with 2,000 odd databases, it's going to take him a couple of weeks. But would you trust him to get every single thing right?
No.
No. Because we're human.
No.
You know, we're human. We make mistakes. Can you imagine going looking at all of those folders of files and making sure you're going to make a mistake? So I wrote a PowerShell script. And the PowerShell script I wrote, I blogged about it, it's on my GitHub, and it enables me to do this. And when I ran this command, it ran 15,500 tests in slightly under 15 minutes, partly because the storage that this backup was sat on was particularly slow. As you can see some red going through there because my log backups have not been run. But we have just checked. Let's do it that way. Go big. Thank you. We're checking for each database. We're now checking the files and on our file system. We're checking that all of our backups exist, that they're enabled, that they're scheduled. We're checking that all of our other maintenance jobs exist and are enabled and scheduled and succeeded. And we're checking all of our databases, checking that we've got the right files in the folder structure that Ola creates for us when we run the maintenance solution. And we ran 273 tests there in just over a minute. If I wasn't running GoToWebinar and anything, it generally runs in about 20 seconds. So that's brilliant. We've got our results. We put them into a variable. We can convert them into JSON like this. You can convert them into HTML. There's a command called a module called Format Pester, which will enable you to turn the results of your Pester tests into an HTML page. I'm not going to show it because, to be honest, I like some of these other ones a bit better. What I like to do is run this code before I talk, because otherwise we'll have to sit and watch it. Is go back to what we did before, where we took our parameters for our Pester test and run a set of tests. It's just going to be exactly the same tests as we've got before. And we're also going to output them using this output format parameter into NUnit XML. So people who are used to CI continuous integration type things, know that you can now make use of that. You can consume that into your continuous integration system and make it part of the procedure. But what we're going to do is we're going to output this into an XML file, and we're going to use this little tool called report unit exe, which you can download from there, or you can take this code and it'll do it automatically and it'll expand it and leave it ready. And then what it's going to do is run through in my temporary folder, grab all of the XML files and turn them into an HTML page that looks like that. With the old report unit and the old version of Pester, it came up looking a lot better. But we can see Rob XPS Dave, 106 tests, 102 passed, 4 failed. Got a little quick summary over here. Now somebody at some point is going to go, well, hang on a minute, 106, 126, 150, total tests, 1,528. Something's not right. I think it's something that inside the report unit viewer exe, which I haven't bothered to explore. This used to be a beautiful way of turning ourselves into some nice pretty things that management can use to filter by failed, and can pull up our message and everything looked wonderful. But really, it's not so truthful now. We can't trust it. I don't trust things that add up like that. So I created some Power BI. I didn't use the XML because I found it hard to pass that inside Power BI. And here's another thing to say. I'm a DBA. I'm an automation guy. I'm a trainer. I do some continuous integration. I do not do BI. I deliberately choose things that look horrible so that the BI people out there, like you, Bert, are shaking your head going, no, you don't do it like that. You can display information much better. You shouldn't use those colors. I know those things. I deliberately do it like this because it makes people like you think I could do that better. And I go, yes.
No, this looks great.
I'll do the Pester. You make it look pretty. But we've taken all of this is based off of the JSON file that we created as the results of our Pester test. And it means that we can do things like this. We can click on things and they'll change. We can pick, oh no, we're unfiltered, aren't we? Let's go to detailed. Let's try the detailed one. Have a look. When it comes in, there we go. We've got little buckets that fill up. That's excellent. Little buckets will fill up with 98.18%. Oh no, 92% succeeded and 8% failed. And we can see which jobs we had running, so we could filter them there. We've got our failure messages coming out. Perhaps we want to know how long our tests took. So we can do it like this. Yeah, look at that. It looks horrible. Yes, it does, but it works. We can see that our new backup jobs took 1.8 seconds. Or we could filter it in a different way. Oh, don't filter it by the same one. That would be daft. Filter all of our file checks took 9 seconds. Or perhaps we just want to look at our 2016 instance. That took 9 seconds. All of these different ways we can filter stuff around in Power BI. And the last one, oh yes, the last one looks pretty much like that. Green is good, red is bad, except if you're a green-red colorblind person, in which case they're both sort of grayish and you can't really tell.
Or a dog.
Or a dog, absolutely. I mentioned that because if you look at the results of the Pester tests, even though it's green and it's red, the format of them means that colorblind people can still see which ones have passed and which ones have failed. So I have been told. I can see green and red, so I can't say for absolute certain. So in a summary, everybody's got checklists. You've got them up in your head. You're thinking about the ones you've got now. Hopefully you're making notes. Oh yeah, I could do this. I could do this. Because manual testing is error prone. Drew cannot do 15,000 tests even in 2 weeks and get them all right, unfortunately. Pester is a unit testing framework for PowerShell, for writing your PowerShell code. If you're going to get deep into writing good PowerShell code, start looking at and understanding Pester. But it's just PowerShell. You can use it to validate your infrastructure. Basic syntax: describe, context, and it code blocks. Don't forget to put your curly brace on the same line. I bet you all go and put the curly brace on the next line just so you can look at the message and see that it really does say what I said. The should command and all of that horrible slide that was full of text is used for testing our assertions, understanding our greater than, our less than, our shoulds, our should nots. Using Pester, we can output our information as NUnit XML and consume it in any sort of system. We can use the report viewer.exe, but beware that some of the numbers might not add up quite as you expect. But if you export it to JSON, you can consume it with Power BI and make pretty things that change color and shape, and everybody knows management like things that change and move around. But I'm going to tell you a story. We talked about how our Pester test could be used to make sure that service desk didn't call us at 3 o'clock in the morning without checking that everything had worked correctly. I know of an organization where when the system goes wrong, it automatically creates a ticket in the ticket system. And what they used to then do was go, oh, 3 o'clock in the morning, system's gone wrong. We need to call Drew. Drew, fix it. It's a database problem. It's bound to be. It's always the database. It's never the database. And when we started being on call, we would have to understand what this process was. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, nobody's really at their best. So you then go, oh no, where was that documentation? I'll log on with my VPN and remember that password and get to there, find the share for where that stuff's saved and go through it, and then go back and do all those tests and then go through and find it's not the database's problem and pass it to somebody else. I thought, well, having watched an earlier version of this, he said, perhaps we could do that better. So now, when the ticketing system gets that ticket for that system, PowerShell, the account holder in the ticketing system, goes, oh, I'll grab that. Thank you very much. I'll assign it to myself. And then it runs the Pester Test. All the Pester Tests are all the things that the on-call person would normally do. And once it's done those, it analyzes them. And for some of them, it might be able to go, oh, hang on, yeah, that's the service that needs restarting. I can do that. Run the Pester Test again. Everything's green. Hand the ticket back to the service desk. I think you can close this. Everything's fixed. But if not, it could go, oh, that's a network problem. I think by my Pester Test, that looks like a network problem. I'll assign it to the network on-call person. Here you go, network on-call person. Here is all of the things that I've done beforehand and the results of them. I think it's your problem. So when you get called out at 3 o'clock in the morning, you look at the ticket has all of these things. Now you can really start working on what's going on. So here's what I say to people. Do you want to be the person who has PowerShell as their manager telling them what to do? Or do you want to be the person that writes the PowerShell that tells other people what to do? I know which one I want to be. Any questions?
Yeah, that's really good stuff, Rob.
Anytime I see automation, that's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
We did have some questions come in during your talk. Going furthest back, SQL Gene asked about, could you elaborate about how Pester uses behavior-driven design, how that compares to test-driven design?
Thanks, Gene. I can't speak confidently enough on that to be able to take that forward. Drew, do you know?
No, when I think of TDD, it's tough because back when I was a developer, that was kind of before I really knew a lot about TDD or behavior versus unit testing, all that stuff. It's a tough one to elaborate on. You know, it's one of those things where if you Google it, you might get 4 different results on the subject, and they'll all be different. It becomes a philosophical discussion at that point.
Yeah, I must say I'm much newer to the TDD side of PowerShell and Pester than I am to the environment validation side. I've done a lot more client work with validating that things are as they should be, and most of my TDD has been within DBA Tools, trying to backport Pester unit tests and integration tests into existing code, which is never the easiest way of doing things. You really should do it the other way around. Right. And, you know, like when I occasionally do write code at my job today, it's all TDD, ReSharper and all that stuff just helps tremendously with .NET code and all that stuff. But so now that you've looked at the funny picture, and hopefully you've all looked at the funny picture, and that's not me. Further reading or watching. I was just going to ask you that because one of the questions that came in was, where can people just learn more about Pester in general? Right. Without a doubt, if you want to learn more about Pester, get the Pester book by Adam Bertram. It's an iteratively developed Pester book, ebook. So every few whatevers, he releases a new version with additions added to it. And it is very, very comprehensive and very, very good. If you'd like to see some more sort of integration type tests, Andre and I did a session at the PowerShell conference where we used AppVeyor to spin up a machine and then run some tests against it, which hopefully could give you some ideas of how you could take that bit further. And if you'd like to know about an introduction to TDD with Pester, come to Dublin, because that's the session I'm doing in Dublin, and I've submitted it elsewhere as well. I use the Cognitive Services Faces API to check speaker faces for beards and show you how to build a function out of that with TDD.
I have to say, I think that was the smoothest transition I've seen all day, straight from where can you learn more to right that slide there. Another question that had come in was, have you thought about auto-correcting some of the errors that Pester returns?
You cannot do that within your Pester test. So you couldn't have a test that failed and then do an autocorrect. You can analyze the results within your test results variable and go, oh, that one failed. That's a service. I can restart the service.
It's one of those things where I love automation. Believe me, I love writing PowerShell and I love automation. But some of those things, I don't know if you would want to correct right away. I think, just correcting it doesn't really tell you why it happened.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a tough one, and that's why I think it's better that you analyze. So you go and have a look. What is that test about? That test is saying that the service is not started. Perhaps we can try restarting the service a couple of times to see if that works. But that test is saying that the network latency has improved. Well, there's nothing we can really do about that. There's not something we can change. And if it's perhaps a SQL Server property or something that we're checking, maybe we don't want to be changing that in the middle of the day just when this test is run.
My favorite was we had a maintenance window. We were trying to stop a service and go do some patching, and some yo-yo had written a script to continuously, if he found a stop SQL service, go start it.
Start it again.
God bless Andrew raised his hand. Please. Right. I mean, it's one of those things that seems like such a good idea when you code it, and then whoopsie. All right. Well, nice job, Rob. Thank you very much for volunteering.
Really good stuff, Rob. Thank you.